Hi, welcome to episode 3 of You Own It with Jerry Thompson. And this month, I thought it would be important for me to discuss the latest news, which is uh, and I'm sure many people have read headlines from CNN to Yahoo to, I think the Buffalo News is coming out with an article soon about the National Association of Realtors settlement, which is going to change the way both sellers and buyers change the way would be the wrong term, but change the disclosures on how both sellers and buyers may compensate their agents. And I want to just briefly see if I can explain to you what this is going to mean and what you'll see at least coming up in the next few weeks in the change in the industry. So what's occurred is there was in the Midwest some litigation from some sellers, and those sellers said, when we listed our property and we put it into the multiple listing system, we did not want to have to pay the buyer's agent. And we felt as though all of the realtors were conspiring to make us do so. And they ended up settling with the National Association of Realtors, and the National Association of Realtors has said, fine, because at the end of the day, sellers never had to compensate the buyer's agent if they didn't want to. They never needed to list their property if they didn't want to. They didn't need to pay a listing broker if they didn't want to. They've never had to listen to do any of this anyways. But the National Association of Realtors, in the spirit of making sure that they could never be construed as steering buyers to certain properties or other properties based on the compensation that was being offered by the seller to the buyer's agent, has agreed to remove all references of compensation to buyer's agents from the multiple listing system. And if you don't know what the multiple listing system is, that's the computer program that ties all of the agents together. For example, in Buffalo, New York, where I work, there's about 2,600 members. And whenever a listing hits the market, for example, in Amherst, New York, I can open my computer that morning and see that there's a house in Amherst that may fit something one of my buyers is looking for. And I can look, if I choose, there's a column in there that says, if I sell this or I bring a buyer to that listing, that seller will pay my commission, and they'll pay 2.5 or 2 or 3 or 1. Sometimes they list them for $1. They don't even have to offer compensation in the multiple listing system. But now that column's going to be erased. And instead, what's going to happen is, because there's no offering of compensation through the multiple listing system, the National Association of Realtors is saying, it's now our policy that if you're a buyer in that market, you need to have a signed agreement with an agent before you go show the house. And that agreement should tell you their buyer's agent's commission is negotiable. Buyer's agent that you're choosing to look at the house with is going to offer certain services. And it should also explain how they get compensated and what that should be. Now, that's all changing on August 17th. Now, what we don't know is what's actually going to happen when it goes out into plan. And one of the things I always fall back on, is I've done this for 34 years, is I remember back when I started in the 90s, there were brokers, there were sellers agents that were not members of the multiple listing system. Back then, when I started, we had books. We didn't have, the internet didn't exist. There was no online marketing services. And there were brokers that weren't members of the board of realtors and didn't participate, and they would put signs up in the yard, and they didn't cooperate, meaning they didn't have enough commission, or their commission they were going to keep for themselves. They weren't going to split it with another agent. They didn't see the benefit to their seller to say to the seller, look, as part of my marketing cost, I'm asking you if it's okay if I take part of the commission I normally would earn if I sold it myself and offer it to other agents to work with me on this and other companies to work with me on this. And those brokers, from when I started, quickly became dinosaurs and were eliminated from the business, because functionally it wasn't in the best interest of the seller not to have a sales force of 2,600 people working for them, and instead just to have one, their only agent. And I always used to I ran into circumstances in the past where literally, like, there would be a buyer that would want a house, and they didn't get along with the listing agent, but the listing agent wouldn't work with other agents, and it really got awkward. That was in the 90s. But today, for the most part, what happens is when a house gets listed, a seller decides they're going to offer with their agent, hey, I'm paying my agent 6%. I'm going to offer 3%. Agent, I want you to offer 3 of your commission to other agents that will show and sell the house. And that offers the seller the distinct advantage of getting as many buyers as possible. And it offers a secondary advantage to the buyer in that they don't have to write a check for commission out of their pocket. They're still buying the house. They're still giving the seller the money to pay their agent. However, they don't have to write it directly out of their pocket. And then they can use it for closing costs or points or home inspections or their own personal attorney rather than having to save an extra 2.5% to 3.5% to pay their buyer's agent. Well, as of the 17th, the offering of compensation that when I would be working with you as a buyer and I would look up and see, oh, I get paid, it's enough, I don't need to have a conversation with you about any extra money, that's going to be gone from the multiple listing system. And the conversations about compensation will be agent to agent, individual based on individual showings. And where it's going to drastically impact you as buyers is that you're no longer going to be able to immediately just go and see a house without an agreement with an agent. Now, this seems crazy in today's world because today in 2024, I can go online, shop, hit a button, and order pretty much everything from, in fact, my car. My car, I ordered online and it was delivered to my driveway. And buyers, today's market, are expecting to be able to hit a button and show up at a house Sunday at 2 and the agent's there. Boom, magic agent, right? You don't know whether or not you're going to work with that agent or not yet. You don't know the competence of an agent, but you hit a button and show up, boom, there's an agent. I want a car, hit a button, car. I want to order something from Amazon. I want Keurig coffee. It shows up at my doorstep every month. I want meals to go. They show up at your doorstep every month. You can do all that by hitting a button. Now, because of the result of this litigation, NAR has created a settlement now where, as a buyer, when you want to see a house, because the compensation is not going to be offered already, they're saying, buyers, we're going to take you back to before the internet existed. When you see a house that you like, when you want to see it, you're going to need to sign an agreement with an agent before you see it with that agent. So what does that mean at the end of the day? It means that when you hit the button, it's going to be less convenient for you to see the house. However, there are some really distinct advantages to it. If you watched episode 2, the steps to buying a house, what I talked about is the role of the agent in getting you step by step by step from the beginning to the top of the staircase comfortably without any panic and solving all the problems. Now that the NAR settlement's going through and we're starting on the 17th, when you as a buyer hit that button and expect instant agent, more than likely what's going to happen is you're going to hit the button and you're going to get an agent that's going to say, before we go and see a house, I think what we need to do is sit down and talk a little bit about what sort of agreement we're going to have. And that agreement could take a multitude of forms, and it's going to be up to each individual company, each individual agent, how they want to practice working with buyers. The majority of agents are probably going to gravitate towards, why don't you and I as a buyer and an agent work together? Why don't we come up with this buyer's agency agreement? And the buyer's agency agreement will assure me that when you buy a house, I'm going to get compensated. And that compensation will be blank, 2.5%, 3%, 3.5%, 4%, 2%. It's a negotiable item between you and that agent. When you've hired and retained that agent and have that agreement, sellers who are cooperating will fundamentally be taking care of what you would need to pay that agent in many circumstances. Some circumstances it may be short. Maybe you have to come up with a little extra money. But the agreement will say, hey, if the seller cooperates, let's say our agreement's for 3%. If the seller cooperates and they offer 3%, I'm accepting it. If the seller cooperates and offers 2.5%, you agree to pay me 0.5%, seller's offers 2.5%, or you could add an extra 0.5% into the contract and ask the seller to pay that as well. Or you agree to pay hourly. You agree to pay by contract. You agree to pay by showing. You agree to negotiate into the contract a higher price in order to get the agent paid his commission. All of that stuff is going to be settled up front. So now, August 18th, the day you call an agent, they're going to say, hey, why don't you come into my office? Let's talk about it. So buyers, plan on a little more bureaucracy, a little slower process, but probably a smarter process. It's going to be a process in which you're going to learn very quickly the differences amongst agents, the pros from the non-pros, the full-time versus the part-time, and the choices you have in hiring a variety of levels of professional services, which is what real estate is. It's like any other professional service. You can hire a top of the line CPA. You can hire, you're going in for, you have a legal issue. You can hire the best attorney in Western New York and pay him $1,500 an hour. Or you can hire some guy straight out of law school that works out of his mom's basement for $150 an hour. That's up to you, right? But as of the 17th, that's a decision you're going to need to make before you get to run out and look at house after house after house after house, and then decide, I'm looking at 8 houses with 8 different agents. You're probably still going to be able to do it, but man, you're going to have to sign 8 different agreements. So what I'm saying to most everybody is the following. 1, stay calm. Nothing's changed. Commissions are always been negotiable. Sellers have always been able to cooperate or not cooperate if they didn't want to. 2, buyers, commissions have always been negotiable. You could always agree to pay your agent or not pay your agent and have the seller pay him, or negotiate something from that agent. 3, agents, you're going to have to prove your worth. If you're not worth it, they're not going to pay you. If you're worth it, you get paid. But it's going to slow things down. Now, I think the presumption in a lot of publications has been, this could be big. It's going to squeeze the industry. This is going to change the price point of real estate for everybody and buying and selling it. And I can tell you from somebody that's been an agent for 34 years and a broker owner of a $100 million company for 12 years, the margins in the business aren't that thick. There's 2,600 close to agents in Western New York. 2,392 of them have sold or rented something this year. The median agent number 1196, has sold $679,000 this year. To you as a consumer, that means they're earning maybe 14 grand in 6 months. And so, often everybody's kind of focused on the Ryan Serhants and the $1 million listing guys in the world that are packing it in and making $127,000 a transaction and living in mansions in New York City. Those are the top 1% of 1% of 1% of the industry. And if whatever industry you're in, if they took the top 1% of 1% of 1%, they'd make it seem real glamorous. It's not. So it's why 80-something% of all agents start and fail in the first 3 years. It's why the vast majority of the 2,600 agents in the industry do barely make a living that is comfortable for them. The top 10%, they do all right, but you don't run into, you're not going to see, I don't think, a drastic plummeting of values. You may see a different way of billing and some other things. And I think it's all going to shake out over 6 months. And I hope somebody can build a better mousetrap. If somebody can show me a quicker, better, easier way for buyers and sellers to sell houses, people have been trying to invent that for forever, including Zillow and Realtor.com and Truly and Homes.com and CoStar. They've all been trying to put brokers out of business forever. Nobody's been able to figure out the secret sauce to it yet. Maybe this will help to start it, but I think for the most part, what everybody needs to be prepared for is, as sellers, when you interview your agent and you're thinking about selling, there's going to be a commission that agent is charging. And how it works is the seller pays a commission and then they authorize that agent to share it. And that agent should explain to you why or why not they want you to share part of their commission, what the advantages are. If they say they're not going to share it, you should really ask, what are they doing with the extra money to generate all of the buyers they may need to generate the same activity as you had? Last month I had a house with 42 showings on a Saturday and Sunday. How on earth would I do that without cooperative commissions? But I explained that to the seller. So as sellers, you should be looking at that when you're talking to an agent. Okay, I see what you're charging. Are you cooperating? If you're cooperating, what are you cooperating at? Why are you cooperating at that? What's the advantage and how are you communicating that? If you're a buyer, before I look at a house, I have to call that agent and I should interview agents. And I should figure out who I want to hire. And I should get an agreement. And it doesn't have to be a 9-month agreement or a 2-year agreement. It should be 60 days, 3 months. I'm going to commit to you looking at houses with you. And I agree that when I buy a house, I'm going to compensate you. And that can happen 4 different ways. Pay the agent direct through the cooperating commission from the seller, asking the seller to pay even if they're not offering a cooperating commission. You can negotiate that into the contract, or asking the seller to pay for your bank closing costs and using that money to pay your agent. Not complicated. But as of the 17th to the 18th, this is what we're going to be seeing. Well, as always, thanks for watching. And you heard it here from me. Thank you so much for tuning in to You Own It. Don't forget to take a look at the show notes for any resources mentioned during the show. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe on YouTube, follow us on your favorite podcast apps, and turn on your notifications so you have access to the latest and greatest. All of our social channels are clickable in the show notes as well. I'd also like to remind you to check out our website, c21jerry.com. There you'll find more info on me as well as my latest listings for all of Western New York. Thanks for tuning in. Remember, through any big decision, you own it.